9 p.m. Wednesday night, I'm Rabbi Efrem Goldberg, joined by my colleague, dear friend, and tonight's co-host, Rabbi Josh Brody, and we are here to take you
behind the Bima.
We're here to take you behind the Bima. Super excited about our guest tonight, David Fishof. Josh, I know you, Rabbi Brody.
Oh my
You've been a
gosh.
fan for a long time. He's known me since I'm a child. Many of our listeners may not have heard of him, but I promise you, after you listen to tonight and hear his stories, his accomplishment, and really ultimately his being at the front lines of trying to make a Kiddush Hashem, fight for Israel, help the Jewish people against anti-Semitism, you'll be blown away by someone who's really, really special. So very excited to have him
Maybe
on.
some of our listeners will want to join me in rock and roll camp. You know,
Never know.
We'll go together, a little
Never
behind the
know.
Bima group.
Listen, we have two co-hosts who play the drums. You're only one of them, so you never know. So, Rabbi Brody, I want to start with this tonight. I read an article recently, one of my friends shared with me, which was written on a faith website, The Great Pastor Resignation. And the pastor was explaining his resignation, why he's stepping down. He says, I've become part of what is known as the Great Pastor Resignation that came in the wake of the pandemic. Barna did a national survey of pastors, and as of March 2022, 42% of pastors considered quitting. 42%.
Wow.
So let's include, for our argument's sake, rabbis, pastors, clergy. And the reasons are myriad, but here are the top 5 reasons why your rabbi is thinking of moving on to something else. You ready? Can I get a drum roll?
You can get a drum roll, but I'm just wondering how many of these apply to us.
Let's listen.
Is it 1 out of 5 or 5?
You ready? Here we go. Number 5, I'm not optimistic about the future of my synagogue, church, 29%.
Okay.
30% not optimistic about the future. Number 4, I'm unhappy with the effect this role has had on my family, 29% also. So nearly 30% look at their family and say, family's been compromised, been affected, not happy. Number 3, current political divisions. That's 38%. 40% of rabbis, pastors say, I'm thinking about stepping down because I can't take how divided, how much hate, how much criticism, how much venom, how much negativity. I can't take it. Number 2, I feel lonely and isolated. 43% pastors, rabbis. I'm not sure. The survey, again, was not of rabbis, so I don't want to get the email. 43% of pastors, but I'm assuming that some element of this survey applies to rabbis. And number 1 reason for the great pastor resignation, you ready? The immense stress of the job, 56%.
That was a good drum roll.
Over 50%, thank you. Over 50, can I go to rock and roll?
Yeah, exactly.
Over 50% pastors, rabbis thinking about resigning because of the immense stress of the job. So my question is this, Rabbi Brody, are you thinking of resigning?
No, but it's interesting. When you listen to each one of those reasons, each one of the 5, I would say that there's a part of each one that I do feel. There might be days where you feel like this, and there might be days where you feel like that. But each one of those things is something which I think is significant. Absolutely.
So I got an email the other day. Every year around this time, some newspaper does an article about what rabbis are thinking about, what rabbis are going to talk about, what are the themes this year on the high holidays, on the Yom Noraim. So I got an email like that from a journalist, and basically said something about, given what's going on, can you be optimistic about anything? And I wrote back, see if I can find this. I wrote back, and I hope they use this quote because I mean it from the bottom of my heart. I relate, like you, by the way, to all 5 of those things. I relate to all 5 of them. So I don't want to minimize anyone who feels that. Like you said, there are days, there are moments, there are interactions, there are experiences, there are emails, there are text messages, there are, right?
Today you might be feeling all 5. Who knows?
Yeah. No, today I feel great. But how many times, Rabbi, how many times have I said to you, Rabbi Moskowitz, like, that's it. Here are the keys. I'm making Aliyah. Don't forget to turn the lights out when you're done.
How many times a year or a week?
Right.
I'm joking.
Say a month, maybe a month, right? Maybe a month. Anyway, I wrote back to the person that, where is this? I want to find it. I wrote back to the person, I've never been as optimistic as I am. I'm more optimistic than ever. Here it is. I got it. You ready?
First of all,
are you optimistic? I hope I'm not spoiling somebody's article. Are you optimistic about next year as we approach the holidays? Why? I'm optimistic every year. The future is not predetermined or a matter of fate. It's up to us individually and collectively. We have to be optimistic and then take the effort and initiative to bring about that brighter future. We have to take responsibility to shape the world, beginning with our world, how we speak, behave, what we believe in, the differences that we can make. And then other questions. I don't want to spoil the article. What concerns you the most the coming year? Can you share any resolutions that you have for the coming year? But my point is that I think, and I think it's really important in the rabbinate or clergy work, to validate and acknowledge all 5 of those reasons. We all feel them sometimes, but to still be optimistic. Like, yeah, do you not love what you do?
I think you and I are very lucky because we get to talk to one another. I'm sure there are pastors or rabbis who are they're the only person in the office, and who do they confide in
Could
if they
be,
have challenges? And
could be.
like we're
But also,
lucky,
don't be a victim and don't be a martyr. Shape the world. Like, what do you want to fix? What do you want to work on? What difference do you want to make? And you'll say, well, you have a big staff, or they have a big budget, or they have a. First of all, we didn't always. And second of all, maybe you can too. Or maybe within what you have, what do you want to do? Right? In other words, I'm just a big believer in any job. My wife knows this. When we go somewhere and there's a TSA agent who's like really happy or smiley, there's a server at a restaurant, there's a whatever you do. I don't care if the guard, whoever the security guard, whatever you do, when like love what you do,
right?
lean into what you do. Don't project that you're a martyr and you're miserable and you're a victim. And I know not everybody has the job that they love, and it's not easy. And I got it. Some people are just trying to fight through the day. But first of all, then think about maybe you could change your career, maybe you could pivot, or maybe within what you're doing, you could find more happiness. You could dream, or you can have ambition and aspiration. But when I was coming back from the vacation this summer, I'm grateful I was able to take one this summer. A couple of people asked me, "How do you feel coming back?" I said, "I'll tell you, I love being with my family. I loved having a healthy break, but I love what I do. So, if you go on a trip with your spouse, like you're happy to get away, it's really nice, and you're sad when it's over. But you're also excited to come home to your family and your children if you love them. And that's
Right.
how I feel about what I do. So I know that you feel that way too. And I just encourage everybody that like love what you do, find something to love in what you do, and try to turn it into a calling, not just a career. Try to not just make a living, try living through it and making a difference. And if you do, there's a lot to be optimistic about in anything, any area that you're working on.
So first of all, it's interesting that you say it like that, but because I guess the difference between many careers and say someone in the clergy and a pastor or a rabbi is that the relationships you have with others in some of those other professions, it doesn't really impact necessarily a lot of people. But here you're miserable and you think everything's falling apart. It's going to impact your whole shul. It's going to impact your whole community.
Right.
And like you said, maybe it is a chance to pivot, but you got to get back in the saddle. This is like a serious thing. You got to.
Yeah.
A lot of people are counting on you.
And to quote you, inspire yourself to inspire others.
There you go. Yeah.
Going into this time of year, especially Elul, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, rabbis convene, they have conventions, they collaborate. Every word that starts with a C, they figure out how to work on what are we going to do to inspire the community. And,
Right.
one of my mentors taught me a long time ago, and I've tried to work on it, is the best thing you could do over the summer and heading into this time of year is to be inspired.
Right.
Because there's nothing more uninspiring than an uninspiring rabbi, teacher,
Exactly.
Mora,
Right.
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 Like you can't just like say over the script or put on the performance of the drasha, or a teacher in a classroom too. Our teachers are grossly underpaid. And I hope that, within Florida, where we've just gotten this enormous relief, $8,000 a student vouchers, this dream come true, that we could take some of that savings to make our teachers' lives a little bit better. But again, a teacher, they're heroes. In the front of that classroom, you got to be energized. You got to be on fire, because as important as curriculum and pedagogy and all the other tools, in the end of the day, there's nothing more uninspiring than an uninspired person trying to inspire you.
And you can't fake that. Everyone sees right through it. Yeah.
Can't fake it.
Yeah.
Be a mayana miskaber. Just be overflowing with your own inspiration. Like fill
Right.
your well and then let that overflow to the people around you.
For some of us, we might be go fill that well at Rock and Roll Fantasy Camp. It just fills us for 2-3 days and come back and rock and roll with the community.
Some need that. That's okay.
Yeah.
Some need to find that break, that inspiration. Some people fly in. Some people go meet with who they need to meet with, or listen to what they need to listen to. Or we have Thursday night, our annual Hispodidus on the beach. We're going to learn something and then spread out on the beach. And just different people need different things to just draw energy. Rabbi Weinreb, who's I think coming to BRS this year, he taught once at a rabbinic conference I was at. I learned so much from him. He talked about the Mishnah, about roots and branches, Mishnah and Pirkei Avos, but then he talked about it. He's a mental health professional, in addition to being a great Talmud Chacham and an accomplished Rav. But he talked about it as he had us all, rabbis, grown men, draw pictures. And it was a tree, and there were roots and there were branches. And you had to write what gave you energy and what depleted you of energy, like what nourished you and what empties you.
Right.
Just identifying, just recognizing and saying what those things are. What energizes you, what gives you energy, and what, do we ever think about that? And how can we mold our life to be around the people, the things, the activities, the obligations that energize, and not the ones that everyone has things that deplete. Like no one wants to take out the garbage or shop or pay the tax. I mean, there's a million things that we have to do that don't necessarily energize, that you have to. I don't know people who get energized by brushing their teeth or flossing, other than dentists, but you have to do the things even if they don't energize you. But on the whole, right, in the bigger picture of things.
Right.
And that was really, really inspiring, is to craft a life like that. So I think it's a real responsibility at every level, right? Because also, how many parents are in crisis, children are in crisis, parenting experts, parenting books, parenting this, parenting back. Doesn't it all start with how are you going to inspire your children for the life that you dream for them if you're not inspired?
Correct.
So are we invested in nourishing and inspiring ourselves so that can overflow?
Wow. Love it.
Starting with clergy,
love it.
rabbis.
Yeah.
What nourishes you?
Music. Which is interesting also, because we're learning now, and the kids are about making brachas on things that you smell. It just shows you there's many different senses that we have, and music definitely nourishes a certain part of the body, specifically the soul, that nothing else does. And some people connect to music, some people don't. People that connect to music, I think those that can't or don't think it's a little like I don't understand it. But some people actually take it to, I wouldn't call it an extreme, because I don't want to say it's like anything bad, but for me personally, music is you get through the day with music. It's got me through some very difficult times in my life. Music, it's I love it.
I definitely hear that. And different people, just like we all have different souls, different things nourish our souls. Some it's art, some it's music. All of us should be Torah.
Sure.
That should be a given. But I wholeheartedly agree with you. And I think music is a religious experience, right? The Levium would sing when the Karbanos were being offered. And the Chazal debate, Iker Shira B'Kli, Iker Shira B'Peh. Is it the music we produce with our mouths that we produce, or is it the instrument that produces it? But there's a lot of Torah about the role.
Yeah.
And some of the great Rebbes, the Piazetzner Rebbe, Hashem Yikom Damo, the great Rav Kalanimus Kalman Shapiro Piazetzner, was a composer and a musician. In fact, when his son was murdered from the Nazis, he didn't play music again until he was murdered. He couldn't express that music that came from his soul. And how many Rebbes, Mudgets, others, they didn't just like tolerate music. And it wasn't just like you have to incorporate the davening to make it pass. Like they viewed that as a religious expression. They composed, they authored. It was a religious experience.
Right. Wow.
And that's what it is for you. You see that?
I love it. I
see
love
that.
it.
Which is a great segue to our guest. Super excited to bring our guest on. David Fishof, American music producer, sports agent, founder, CEO of Rock and Roll Fantasy Camp, now Comedy Camp. Began his career in the Catskills and then went on to represent many sports figures you have heard of, many rock and roll stars you have heard of, all with a yarmulke, keeping Shabbos, learning Torah, and all trying to raise the profile of the Jewish people, Israel, advocating for Israel, making a Kiddush Hashem, standing up against anti-Semitism. He's written 2 books, putting it on the line, a book about his experiences in the world of sports and entertainment, and Rock Your Business, what you and your company can learn from the business of rock and roll. He's just a wonderful person, a really, really special person who does good and helps other people. And we're really excited to bring on our friend, David Fishof. What a great honor, what a privilege. And it's going to be so much fun to go behind the Bima with the great David Fishof, a legend, a industry leader, an agent, an advocate, and an incredible representative of the Jewish people, making a Kiddush Hashem for many, many years. Someone who knows me since I'm a little boy. Thank you so much for letting us go behind the Bima together with you.
Wow. Well, thanks for having me. My dad was a chazan. My brother's a rabbi. My whole family's a rabbi. My son-in-law's a rabbi. I just didn't want to be a rabbi.
You don't want to be a rabbi, but you are a rabbi in other ways, which is actually a great place to start because, the truth is, while so many members of your family, right, your father was a chazan, a cantor in Hackensack, New Jersey, 35 years, your brother a rabbi, of course, your son-in-law, a good friend of ours, Rav Shlomo Einhorn, doing incredible things, one of the most creative, brilliant rabbis I ever met. And all of them put together, I don't know, represent Judaism to the masses or have had an impact or influence on a large stage the way you have as an Orthodox Jew with a yarmulke, representing Torah values, and an outstandingly successful agent in sports. Phil Simms, the Giants, Super Bowl winners, the Monkees, Ringo Starr. We could go down the list. Rabbi Brody's probably better to do that than I am. But and all of it as a unabashed, unashamed, unapologetic religious Jew. So in many ways, you are a rabbi to the masses and to the non-Jewish broader world. Is that part of why you went into it? Does that weigh on you? Have you thought about that through the years, what you represent and where you come from?
Well, I come from, my dad's a Holocaust survivor, and he
Wow.
survived Auschwitz and Buchenwald. And it's his inspiration that first of all kept me from. I mean, there's no question. His stories, his telling me every day, reminding me, good and bad, the effects, but mainly good. And I say to myself, my dad, if he could, talk about Yiddishkeit in the camps and how he got on the floor and matzahs, he did anything he could to get to exchange cigarettes with the Nazis so that he could, to get tobacco and make cigarettes so that he could make matzahs in Buchenwald or the stories. And, there's a great book called The Yellow Star. And it tells about these 5 guys who survived Buchenwald and Auschwitz. And it's written by a guy named Unsdorfer. And it was reprinted recently by Cohen Publishing. And these guys, they talk about how they lit Hanukkah candles in Auschwitz. And, that's all I heard from my dad was his survival, to be a Yid. And so, yeah, I weighed heavily in a positive way,
Right.
that if he could do it, then I surely have to do it.
And is that part of what informs the work that you do, even from the beginning? And we'll talk about the work that almost accidentally you went into, but not only being successful in the measures of business and rock and roll and financially, but being successful in terms of values and representing Judaism.
So what I love now with my work the last 20 years basically is I went off the road and created these rock and roll fantasy camps. And now I'm doing a comedy camp with Jay Leno. I love changing people's lives through the power of music. And it's giving back, because my whole life, all I see is rabbis. All you do is give back. You give
Right.
back to your communities, whether it's my father, my brother, even Rabbi Einhorn, constantly just
Yeah.
giving back. Here I have an opportunity to give back and change people's lives. So it definitely has an inspiration. The giving back aspect of Yiddishkeit is just, what do we say? It's better to give than to receive. And I think that the rewards that we see, and me with these rock camps, every day I open up my emails, I get 2, 3 emails. I'm opening for ZZ Top. I'm recorded this record. I went backstage, and the stories are just unbelievable. The
You're
results,
helping people's dreams come true, which is
yeah.
really
I
made
mean,
to be an angel. That's what it means.
it really was great. 4 years ago, I'm in New York City, and before COVID, and a guy stops me. I was running to have lunch with my son. He says, "Mr. Fishof, it's Fishof." I said, "Yeah, yeah." He says, "I just got back from Moscow. My band opened for Aerosmith." I said, "What are you
Wow.
talking about?" "Well, I met Joe Perry at your camp, and I sent his manager our CD, and she said, she said, can we open for you? Can we open for the band?" And she said, "Well, let me ask Joe Perry." And she takes Joe the CD, and Joe says, "This band wants to open for you guys in Moscow." And he says, "Where did I meet him?" He said, "Rock and Roll Fantasy Camp." He said, "Let's do it."
That's
And
great.
next thing, the guy's working in front of 50,000 people. So
Wow.
that's the kind of stuff that you really, really enjoy when you're changing people's lives.
Have you had the opposite experience? Has your Judaism ever been a barrier? Have there been artists who didn't want to work with you, or people said, "You're a religious Jew, forget about it"? Has it gotten in the way?
Well, first of all, has it gotten in the way? I'll never know the anti-Semites who don't want to work with me. But I
Right.
will tell you that, when I was a sports agent, I bumped into, I went to Pittsburgh. I was negotiating a contract, and a guy would say to me, "Are you married to some sheiks back there?" And it's like, so but people know who I am, what I'm about. So in today's world, when a rocker would turn me down, or if an athlete had turned me down, he probably knew that I was an Orthodox Jew. And but I didn't attract them. I attracted a Christian athlete who really was family oriented, like Phil Simms, and the whole I had the whole offensive line of the Giants, and Jim Burton, Phil McConkey, and Lou Piniella, and Randy Myers. I had a lot of great ball players, and they were, I guess they came from, Christian families and religious families. And I mean, Phil Simms, his father said to him, "Yeah, you hire yourself a Jewish boy that they know how to make money," and Phil Simms didn't know what he was. He was from Kentucky. So, and he was a guy who would call me every Friday and say to me, "Did you take your Shabbos shower?" And, and he was just amazing. And, they all wanted, and it's so funny because I remember when I was telling about my dad, I remember Lou Pinella, coming to visit my dad up in the Catskills and in the bungalow colony. We had done an appearance and up in a camp. That's how I started. And he wanted to hear my father's Holocaust stories. And Coach Parcells. Coach Parcells was amazing. I mean, he said to me one day, he says, your father has all these. He's from Hackensack. I said, yeah. He says he has his minion group that comes. I said, yeah. How do you know about it? He says, well, they're all my father's friends, and I grew up in Hackensack, so he knew the local funeral director there. He was best friends with them all. So it's amazing how it all comes together.
I want to get Rabbi Brody in 1 second, because I think this is the most exciting episode that we've ever done for him.
Yeah.
But I want to ask you one more question about your dad, because as a Holocaust survivor who then spent a career and his life as a chazan, and a chazan is up there leading the conversation with God, representing the community in appealing to God. What relationship did he have with God after all that he had been through? Right? You'd expect a lot of Holocaust survivors to say, God, I'm not sure I want to ever talk to him again, or I don't hear him talking to me. And here he is on the Bima leading the conversation with God after all he had been through. And what did that mean to you?
Rabbi, I'm still questioning it. I still question it. I mean, first of all, he was a chazan in Brockton, Massachusetts. He was a chazan in Galveston, Texas. And, he almost got fired from a few of these jobs because he was the greatest guy. Funny. My father was the youngest of 12. He survived life by being humor. It says in the book that he would entertain, but he would talk about it every day. And, I remember, when I was in 5th grade, 6th grade, he came home and the shul wanted to fire him because he would tell the students he believed in telling the stories. Unlike so many other Holocaust survivors' parents who didn't want to talk about it at all. My father talked about it every day. And, when I came home from yeshiva, there would be a half a piece of bread and toast in the refrigerator. And I said, Dad, why aren't you, one day I'd come home, I'd eat it. And I said to him one day, why don't you eat it? Why do you always leave it there? It's like, for my next meal. And there's no question that, he had, well, first of all, here's another amazing story. My dad, he was a printer, so he learned printing in the business. His brother-in-law was Gestetner. As you remember, I don't know if you remember those machines, those Gestetner machines. Well, that was his brother-in-law. And so my father, during the war, he escaped Seret, a concentration camp out of Bratislava, and went into worked his way to Budapest and was working in a printing store. And at night, he would make false passports. And he saved many Jews' lives. I mean, I met so many people, including the Bava Rebbe. When I was 10 years old, my dad took me to see the Bava Rebbe, and the Rebbe turned to me and he said in Yiddish, you probably have a lot of people who speak Yiddish now. I don't speak Yiddish well, but he said, in my ganze Jorgen, Chagamachem Menschen Yidden, dein Tata, Tomachem a goy. My father made him a passport that, said, my whole life I made people Jews. He said, your father made me a goy. My father made him a false passport that saved his life. And, years later, I asked my cousin recently, before he passed away, I said, how come my dad didn't make one for himself? And, he said he was saving people's lives, and eventually got caught. And he got caught, and he was taken to Auschwitz and beaten the crap out of. And but I think it's my dad's close that I have this wonderful son-in-law that we talked about. So it's not my show business life.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Brody.
Okay. Wow. First of all, it's a big honor.
For those who don't recognize, that is Rabbi Brody.
Maybe I didn't recognize a rabbi like that. I'm going to tell I have to tell you a story, Rabbi, because you see, I know how much time we have here, but you remind me of Joe Perry was at one of my camps, and he gets up there and he says to he does a Q&A, and Joe Perry of Aerosmith, and he says,
see his picture in the back?
Oh yeah, it's in the back.
I got you.
He says to a guy, he says, well, what do you do for a living? He said, well, I'm a lawyer, and on weekends I play guitar in my band. And he says to him, he says, you're full of crap. He didn't say it that way. He said it a bit worse. He said, you're a guitarist first. You do the legal BS to buy your guitars. So, me right away, I called my brother, Joey, and I said, Joey, do you know what Joe Perry just said? He said, David, I would give up the rabbinate to be a full-time drummer. So,
right.
I look at you, and And if you guys could be on tour now, and, look at this. Ay, ay, ay.
Oh yeah, you have no idea. So first of all, for people that don't know, the Rock and Roll Fantasy Camp, when they bring in the rockers, they're called counselors. And
Yeah.
I said to my wife, I said, you don't realize, I was probably, if life didn't take me through the rabbinate, I was going to be a counselor, because after high school, my plan was to go to Hollywood, go and play in the Roxy, go and play in the Troubadour, go and play in the Whiskey. I
Wow.
wanted to be there, so I would have been one of your guys.
Yeah, you probably, yeah, exactly. That's my customer, rabbis. Someone who starts life and then they have a choice. They want to be a rock star or they want to get a job, and most of the time they
Right.
have to get a job. Yeah,
Took the job, but as you can see, maybe we'll end up back at the camp one day. But I was just wondering.
I get some a bunch of from people. They come, and it's funny. At the last camp, I made Joe Perry jam after it was in Florida. I said, Joe, well, it's great because these rockers like to sleep late. But I say, if you're appearing on Saturday, you got to come after Shabbos.
I love that. So first of all, I noticed that this year it actually it falls out on the same Sunday as the Chabad's Kinder Shluchim. So I don't know how that you might lose a few there, but
I have a guy in Florida whose father has a private plane. He flies up the local rabbi there. So
he won't get you back. But I'm just wondering, you see many Jews are in rock and roll, and Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley you've had at the camp many times. Is there ever like a conversation that takes place at a very high level? Like they know you're Jewish, they're Jewish. Is there any acknowledgement of the fact that that a couple of Jews getting together? Any pride there?
My next camp I have Marty Friedman from Metallica. I mean, I love him. I love Max Weinberg. I love the guys who don't change their names. They're my friends. I mean, Max Weinberg showed up to my bar mitzvah and my son's bar mitzvah in Teaneck, and
wow,
he's dancing. Oh yeah, I have conversations with them. I have some serious ones. Gene Simmons and I have had some serious talks. He does promote Israel. He was recently, I was at a dinner with him. He invited me where he spoke for the Holocaust, for his mom was a survivor.
Sure.
But, he doesn't, we would talk about Israel and he says, I don't get it. Why does God always have to say, I'm great, I'm great, I'm great? He'd rather it say,
Gene is great.
That's all he talks about is how great he is. He doesn't say what God says it. But, I've had many conversations. My favorite story, I love, I show up to, Lincoln Square as a kid, and Paul Schaefer
sure.
It's up to, would be every morning with Minya with me. And I could see, but he wanted to get up there. And by 6 months in, he's doing Ashrei and Volotzion and he's saying Kaddish from the Bima. And it was really beautiful to see him and so many artists. I've taken the president of MTV to Mincha every day. He would call me, and I love that. I love when they come to me and ask me. My brother Joey married a few of these rockers, a drummer from Mountain.
Wow.
When their parents die and they call me, I send them to my brother and talk to them. But a lot of people have a Yiddish heart. Listen, you cannot be this creative and write songs and play music in front of these people without having some heart and without having a soul.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Brody. Keep going. I know you're on fire. You're on fire down here.
I got so much here.
Let's go.
You're speaking about the fact that your family, obviously was in the Holocaust, and we call this Rock and Roll Fantasy Camp. They call those the camps as well. Has there ever been an idea, perhaps, to bring some of these rockers to the camps to give them a tour and see where you're from and what your family endured?
Not that, but I really try Israel. I mean, I have. I've been involved with the state of Israel. My dearest friend is Sam Grunwald, who was the consul general from Hollywood, Florida, and he came here to be the consul general for 4 years. And someone introduced me to him, and my friend Steve Spira, and Steve Spira is the vice president of Warner Brothers Business Affairs, or the president of Business Affairs, and he wears a yarmulke every day. And I love out here in California. We have, I had from YU, I had a few interns years ago, and one was Gil Goldstein, who went on to, produce the Kardashians and be the president of Buna Murray. I mean, a lot of out here in California, it's a lot easier if you're in the writing business. to be from. So, we have quite some great writers out here. But I've had a lot of discussions, about going to Israel. I planned the 70th anniversary for Israel. We did a big thing here in Hollywood. I'll tell you, it was really hard. It was really hard. I mean, I reached out to Billy Crystal, and he said yes to me. But I tell you, I cannot tell you how many names turned me down because they're scared of their careers. Recently, a very dear friend of mine, I finally, I said, come on, I need you to go to Israel and get on a plane. I got you someone to take you by private plane. I got you some money. I got, whatever you need. And he just refused. And so I work on a couple organizations. I have to say, this week, my biggest disappointment was Eric Clapton. I mean, he came out and in favor of Roger Waters, and there's no bigger mamzer than Roger Waters. I mean, he goes to Israel, takes out $5 million to perform there. He's got a Jewish accountant, a Jewish lawyer, but he's just so bad. He's such a bad person. And then see Eric Clapton come out and support him. It was sad for me this week.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. Clapton's also got a soul. He's got some deep music. That's really upsetting. We've always thought, you watch the Jews who've risen to prominence within the industry, and they have a huge platform and they have a huge following, and to use it to tell the truth and to inspire people about the light. And there's so much negativity and so much slander about Israel, but there's a lot of positivity about the only liberal democracy in the Middle East, and allowing people to be themselves, and women driving, and women's leadership, and people being able to choose their identity. And as religious people, however complicated that part is, but it's the only place in the Middle East that you won't be hung and dragged behind a car for being true to who you are. And the Jewish superstars should be telling that story.
There should be telling the story. I mean, Streisand went to Israel years ago, but I can't tell you how many comedians and how many actors it turned us down. My favorite was, Frasier. What's his name? Who's the actor?
Yeah.
What's his name?
Great, Kelsey Grammer.
Kelsey Grammer was great. I remember having lunch with Sam, and I had lunch with him, and he said, "I'm there. I've never been to Israel, but I want to support." So, it was easier to get Goyim to show up. We got ball players to show up, but I can't tell you how many Hollywood personalities were just afraid. And this was not a non-political event. It was for Yom Ha'atzmaut. We wanted to show. Sam came up with an idea to show the 10 decades of what Israel has done for the world, and that itself is 20 podcasts. I mean, and I love being involved in that, and being involved in organizations that to try to combat against these artists who battle Israel. And so that to me is really, I enjoy it, but it's terrible. It's
and
terrible.
you're being at the front lines of fighting for Israel, fighting anti-Semitism is huge, and having you inside, and having you having that access, and having you being trusted by those people. I don't know that people can fully appreciate the difference that makes. The people who behind the scenes are in the ear of the people who have millions of followers, and when they make a decision, it has real impact and big impact. And that story, Mr. Fishof, almost didn't happen, because I watched the documentary about Rock Camp. And it's really amazing when you think about the athletes you've represented, the rock stars you've represented. And one theme that comes up over and over is you're not a lawyer. No offense, you're not super athletic, and you're not super musical. So it's not that you're a musician who then became an agent. It's not that you are a star athlete who then went on to represent people. And it's not that you're a lawyer who became a lawyer who specializes in this. So how did it happen? And what's your message to other people about fulfilling their dream, about being able to achieve what they hope to do?
And I spoke to Rabbi Joey, and he wants to maybe throw in how he might have influenced you.
Yeah, no, Joey definitely had an interest. I remember picking up Ginger Baker at the airport, and I turned to Ginger Baker, the great drummer from Cream, and I said to him, Ginger, I said, I heard two things growing up. It was God and Ginger Baker. And I said, my father talked about belief in God, and Joey, all he talked about was Ginger Baker. So definitely Joey had an influence. I was never a rock and roll fan. I'm a people person. I love sports. I have to say that. I love sports, but I really enjoyed the neshama of people, especially creative people. And I think that's my bond. I mean, my favorite story was 3 years after I'm representing Ringo, and I produced his all-star band. I booked him at the Concord Hotel in the Catskills. Why the Concord? Because, I used to book I used to start all my shows at the Concord, Dirty Dancing, the Monkeys, because I could eat, and that was important. I got the stage, I got the rooms for free, and and all these musicians couldn't find any of their hanger-oners and their drug dealers up in the Catskills.
What did Ringo say when you were up in the mountains?
Exactly.
Yeah, the mountains, where they're going to go. So I used to rehearse all my shows at the Concord, and I would make a deal with the owner, the Parkers. I said, give me the place. I'll do my first show there. And, the biggest show, the Monkeys was the biggest thing that ever happened to the Catskills. And that's a whole other story. There was so much traffic on the opening of that tour. That we had to hold the show up an hour because the state police said they couldn't stop the traffic. And
Wow.
and then I did Ringo, and but Ringo didn't want to rehearse there. But he asked me, can Ringo play in the Catskills? Can he play the Concord? And I made a deal with him, and I'm in England, and an article shows up in the Wall Street Journal. Ringo started to play the Catskills, and where Milton Berle plays, where Tom Jones, a Beatle, playing the Catskills. So I get a call from Ringo, and he calls that morning, and he's, oh no, he's going to fire me, and what does he want from me? And he says, oh, Bob and I want to take you to dinner. So I said, oh no, what did I do wrong? I knew I blew it. So, okay, picks me up. We go, and I'm saying, what does he need to have dinner with me for? He's met McCartney. He's got McCartney. He's got all his cover there. Go to dinner, kosher restaurant. And he always respected it. It was really, really, really nice. I have to say that first of all, the Goyim, they respect you. Once they sign with you, they respect you, and all my clients have been amazing. He says to me, Bob and I wanted to ask you, why did you sign me? You never talked to me about music. You never talked to me about the Beatles. You always tell me about the deals you're making. And I told him a story that I started in the Catskills, and my brother was your favorite drummer, and he motivated me to go out there and sign you and put an all-star band behind you. So, yes, I heard all from Joey a lot, and sports I loved, and he starts laughing. I remember the pasta came out of his mouth. That's why you called me. And but I love, and I also wake up every day being creative. I got to come up with new ideas all the time. Keeps me motivated. It keeps me, in the game.
So your success, what would you attribute your success to, right? You enter an industry where you don't have an expertise and you don't even have the credentials, and yet here you are, super successful looking back. So what was the secret? Being a people person.
Being a people person, when I would negotiate my sports contracts, I would go find these young rabbis students at YU to help me negotiate my contract, because I knew that negotiating contracts is like Gemara. And so I had some, funny stories over the years. One of my favorite was I used to learn every Friday morning with Rabbi Charles Radansky. I don't know if you knew Charlie, Rabbi. He's a YU grad, and he was a young assistant rabbi. And I walk in on Friday morning, and he sees I can't pay attention, and he's right. I couldn't pay attention. He says to me, 10 minutes into learning, he says, "What's wrong?" He says, "I see your mind's not anywhere. What's wrong?" I said, "Well, I'll be honest with you, Rabbi." I said, "I went to see the Mets yesterday. I'm negotiating a contract for Dave Magadan, and Magadan was at that time wasn't a free agent, but he was up for arbitration, where we're allowed to go arbitrate his salary in front of a judge, and the judge either chooses your number or they choose the player's number. It's not like in between. So you have to prove really in arbitration the midpoint of where if you want 1,500 and the team offers you 750, or if the midpoint is whatever the midpoint is, 1,200, 1,250, you got to prove 1,251. So I couldn't pay attention, and he says to me, "Let's learn the Gemara and let's talk about it afterwards." So I learned the Gemara with him, and then he says, "Well, how can I help you?" I said, "You really want to help me?" He says, "Yeah." He says, "Oh, whatever you need." And I said, "Okay, come to my office later on. We'll discuss it." I'm walking to my office, and I'm saying to myself, baseball is comparisons. All it is comparisons. When you negotiate contracts, you have to compare this player to that player. So it's just like the Gemara. So I went and came to my office, and I said, "Here's my issue. I said, Dave McAnan had a great year. He had 321. He had 64 RBIs, 2 home runs. I said, he made 300,000, and the paper said he's going to get $1 million. And I go see the Mets yesterday, and they offered me to double his salary, 600,000. I thought I was going to walk in there and wasn't going to be within a question, that they were going to give me $1 million because the newspaper said it. So he said, well, what do you need me to do? I said, well, here are the players that the Mets they brought up, and these guys are making $2 million, $1.5 million. I need you to compare why Magadan is worth $1 million. So I said, give you a few days. Give him a few days. He calls me up Wednesday. He says, you won't believe it. He says, I did the research, and Magadan, is worth more than those guys making $2 million. He's worth more than these players making $1.75 million. And I know these numbers are small comparative to today, but those were big numbers those days. So I said, what are you talking about? So he shows up to my office and he says, well, if you look at Magadan, he might have got 64 RBIs, but those 64 RBIs were meaningful. The score was 2-2. He made it 3-2. The score was 2-1. He tied the game up, made it 2-2. He was a clutch hitter. I said, stop. Let's go. I'm calling the Mets now. We're going to Shea Stadium. And he says, what do you mean? I said, yeah, stop. I call up Al Harrison as the Mets general manager. And I said to him, I'm coming with my rabbi in 2 hours. We're coming to Shea Stadium, and I want to have a meeting with you. So I didn't tell him his rabbi. I just said, can I come over and talk about Magnan's contract? He says, yeah, come on in. So I show up and I bring Rabbi Rudansky, and he's holding all these books. Now, not Sfarim, but he went to Elias' sports office, and they had all the statistics in these big books. And what he did was he went through every pitch and every hit that Magadan, and he compared it to the first baseman of the Texas Rangers at the time and the Philadelphia Phillies. Both those first basemen were making, a couple $1 million. And he walks in, and now at the time, I wanted $1 million. After hearing the rabbi's presentation, I decided, you know what, I'm going to go to arbitration, ask for $1.5 million, because again, I had to find the midpoint, whatever the Mets were offering. Anyways, make a long story short, I walk in there, and there's Phillips, the assistant general manager, and Harrison, and I bring in Rabbi Rudansky, and he's all nervous. I said, just follow the lead, Rabbi, and walks in. And I said, Al, I'm here to prove to you with my rabbi that why Magadan deserves $1.5 million and not $1 million. And he said, what are you talking about? I said, Rabbi, tell him. So Charlie, this is what he said. When Magadan hit 64,
that's great.
And they were all meaningful. And when the other guy, when he went and hit 100 RBIs, the score was 9-1. He made it 9-2. He made it 11-3. He made it 12-3. He said, everyone, and then he starts comparing to that player who's making $2 million. And then all of a sudden, Harrison says, stop. Okay, I'll give you the $1 million. I said, no, it's too late now. I want $1.5 million. And I said, I'm going to go to arbitration. Now that I did all the work, I'm going to go to arbitration, and I'm going to prove that Magadan's worth $1.5 million. He says, get the rabbi out of the room. I said, Rabbi, can you leave? And I said, if Phillips leaves, I'll have the rabbi leave. So they both leave. And I knew one thing back then, the Mets didn't like Jews. The Payson family was known. They were anti-Semitic. And whatever. They weren't big favorites. They weren't big lovers of ours. So he says, okay, I'll give you $1 million. I said, no. I want $1.5 million. Okay, I'll give you $1.1 million. I said, no, I'm not taking $1.1 million. $1 million. I said, no, we're not doing $1.2 million. And I kept staying because I knew I was going to win arbitration. I get him up to $1.45 million, and he says, get out of my office. And I got Magadan $1.45 million. So I remember calling Mags from the parking lot and coming out of Shea Stadium, and he says to me, how did you get me $1.45 million? Every agent told me they'll get me $1 million. They try to steal me away from you. How'd you get $1.45 million? I said, I have a rabbi. And he was laughing, and we laughed. And so I used to use Rabbi Hain has from Lawrence, your friend probably has a son who helped me with the contracts. The rabbinical students, they knew baseball more than so. I think it was the success of having people around me was really good. Whether it was my brother in the music who loved it, and he had passion for these people, or these young kids who, the yeshiva kids, they know more about sports than today it's unbelievable, the statistics and the players. So I think that's been a good success. I don't mind sharing it and asking people for advice.
What a story. But
Wow.
it's such a competitive,
I
it's
love
such a
it.
competitive area, right? Every agent's trying to
Yeah.
sign people. So these Hall of Fame rock and rollers and athletes, they signed with you. What do they see in you? Why do they love you? Why do they trust you?
I think it's my creativity. I'm not afraid to, as you saw in the movie, to do things that aren't hip, and everyone's so afraid to be hip. I'm not afraid to do anything. I'm from the Catskills. I'm Jewish, and you need to like my ideas. Now listen, it was very hard when I started my rock camp. It was hard for me to get players. For musicians to want to do it. I'm not jamming with a stranger. So listen, I've had a lot of rejections too, and with players, I've gone after not many players. I usually didn't go after players. I usually, Phil McConkey lived in my apartment next door to me, and I said to him, I want Bavaro, and he calls me back, and I said, I'm a big fan of Bavaro. He calls me back. He comes back after practice. He said, Bavaro wants to come to your house for Friday night meal. So he came to my house for a Friday night meal. And I said, bring him this Friday night. And he went to Notre Dame. He wanted to. He studied Judaism, and he wanted to know what a Shabbos was. And he came to my house, and all of a sudden we're sitting down, and he sees a challah, and he thought that was his role. These guys, they eat a lot. And I said, no, I got to slice that in seven.
That's great.
But I think I've been intrigued to them, and again, I'm a person, as you know, rabbis. You really have to sell yourself as a person. So when I don't sell my, it's funny. I remember showing up. The Giants were winning they're on their way to the Super Bowl, and the players turned to me and said, "Why did you come to the game? You're never at our games." And so I was so busy doing the Monkeys that year. Monkeys were so big for me. In '86, I brought the Monkeys back, and that was the year the Giants, win the Super Bowl. And I was so busy that, even Phil Simms says in his book, he says, my agent was so busy doing the Monkeys. But I always found time. I think it's having a neshama, having, caring for people. I didn't talk sports with them. I try to talk sports. I realized, I remember Simms, they played a Monday night football game, and Simms threw the ball to Bavaro, and in the 10-yard line, he's running. And then by the second down, he by his 2-yard line, he falls. And I called Simms the next morning. I said, well, why did Mark fall? He should have just gone in the end zone. And he said, Fishof, he had the fastest guy in the NFL chasing him. I'm so glad he tucked the ball in. We can run it in. And he said, and then I realized, stop talking football or talking sports to these players, and talk about their lives, and talk to people about the things they need. Everyone talks sports with them.
Right. Is using the Gemara logic, I guess I was also bothered. I didn't know if I end up enrolling in the camp, do I take a guy as a drummer? I'm really a drummer. Do I take Steven Adler, and then he'll teach me some great things about the founding of Guns N' Roses? Or is it, no, I'd rather take Slash as a counselor because I get to jam with Slash. So I'm not sure which direction to go there. But I'm just wondering, I guess part of the sale might be when you speak to some of these rock and rollers, these counselors, they don't need the money, and they're not doing this for Roger Daltrey. I mean, these are the greatest. You got the best of the best. Is part of the sale that you sell them? There's something about giving back. There's something about.
Absolutely. I mean, Roger Daltrey is a great example. I mean, here's a guy who if you ask him what his biggest accomplishment is, he talks about his tzedakah. He has a charity called Teenage Cancer Trust, where he opens up, in all the hospitals, kids, teenagers, to get their cancer, the treatments, they have to usually go where old people are or babies. And he came up with, he found this organization that builds wings at hospitals where teenagers can get and look up and watch MTV and see posters of Eminem and Aerosmith and the Beatles, and they can make them feel better. And he realized that when these kids would feel better, they would recover over their cancer treatment. So Roger took a loving for this. And I remember, Rabbi, you'll appreciate this, both of you. And when my son-in-law became a rabbi, he went up to a small community in New Rochelle, and and I went to help him negotiate his contract there. And I love helping rabbis. I mean, I'm the best negotiator when it comes to rabbis. Having a father who's a chazan, and I know how to do the. My father even said to the president, his later years, he said, my next contract, you're going to negotiate with David. He told the president of Hackensack. So so the president said, have David call me. I go call him, and he said, David, come see me. And my father was making $10,000 as a chazan in Hackensack, New Jersey. And I turned to him and I said, I want to talk to you about my dad's contract. He says, I know, David. He says, we can't afford the chazan. And I think my father was 79 years old. I said, well, let's stop right here. I said, I'm going to write you a check for $10,000 and we're going to double my father's salary. And you cannot let him go. And then he says, okay, David, I respect that. And I go home and I say to my father, he says, no, how did you do on my contract? And I said, Dad, I doubled your salary. And he turns to my mother in Yiddish, you should have been doing my contract my entire career. But I forgot the point I was getting to. What were you asking me? I'm sorry.
About the giving back. That's why they do the rock and roll.
Yeah. So Roger, that's what I was telling you the story about Rabbi Einhorn. So he's in a small community, and I wanted to see my grandson. I wanted to see him every Shabbos. So I said, you should come to Manhattan and take a job in Manhattan. And there's a job open at the West Side Institution. And he comes back and he says, I checked out the shul and everyone told me I shouldn't take that job. I mean, Rabbi Lamb said that everyone told me it's a small shul and and I said, do me a favor, I'll help you. Come take the job in Manhattan. So we went for the praba. Everybody knows what a praba is. It's an audition. I take him to meet the president of the shul. And what was the praba? The guy turns to me and says, what's this week's parsha? Thank you very much. That was it. And he hired him on the spot. And we're a minyan every morning. And Rav Shlomo says to me, so what am I going to do here? I said, here's what we'll do. Let's do rock and roll and Shabbos. I'll get two rock stars to come and on a Friday night to talk. And you'll talk Torah, and instead of Led Zeppelin, I know you know how creative he is.
Unbelievable. Brilliant.
Stairway to Heaven, to Jacob's Ladder. And he came up with great topics, Bob Dylan. And I got him rock stars. I got him Jewish rock stars. I got Leslie West to come and
Mountain
Stanley to come and all these great people every year. And then one year I turned to Roger Daltrey and I said, Roger, would you come to my son-in-law's synagogue on a Saturday and see what a Shabbos lunch is? And just you don't have to speak. So he says, sure. And he came. And I'll never forget, we went to pick him up because he was living, he always stays in an apartment 3 blocks from there. And he stays and he says, he comes to the meal, and Shlomo did a whole speech about all his songs, not the Pete Townsend songs, all the songs that Roger wrote. And he tied it into the Parsha and about giving. And Roger got up there and Shlomo said, can I ask you some questions? And he got up there, he spoke for a half hour. Wow. And he talked about his love of giving. And I think that many rock stars today, especially if they're on the AA program, and I couldn't have done this years ago, but now they're into giving. They, the rock camp, as you see in the movie, from Sammy Hagar on down, it reminds them what it was like when they first started. So yes, they are at a stage where they're giving back. The ones who do it for charity is awesome. And the charity's over, Roger's charity has taken over his life, and that's his priority in life.
Wow.
And when a rocker sees a shul on a Shabbos morning, they take that with them wherever they go. And if they're somewhere and someone says something disparaging about a Jew, they say, I don't know what you're talking about, the most beautiful, welcoming people and all that again. And tell us about
Roger said to me to this day, every time he says, how's your son-in-law? And I remember taking him to meet Queen. And to meet, he wanted. Someone loves Queen, so I called the guys from Queen and Roger Taylor and Brian May, and I said, can I bring my son-in-law to one of your shows? And there's Shlomo holding the Gemara, and I introduced him to Brian May, and I said, Brian, he knows more about you than you know about yourself, and he's a Bucky. Shlomo's a Bucky. Meatloaf too. I've taken Shlomo to meet Meatloaf. I take him to meet all his heroes, and they love meeting a rabbi. It just, they're so used to meeting drug dealers all day. I wanted me to rabbi, rabbi they respect. I've had a
Unbelievable.
lot of funny stories. I've had Ringo Starr come to my house on a Friday night dinner, and he wanted to know what a Shabbos meal was. And he came, and when I had my grandson, and I know we're sitting there, and my daughter says to me, I don't know, Ephraim, my daughter Shira said, Dad, we have to wash and we have to do all the things just because Ringo's. I said, relax. We're gonna wash. Husband's gonna do a Devar Torah, and we're gonna do everything. And we get up there and we do Shalom Aleichem, and then we go to wash, and all of a sudden Ringo says, I like this family stuff that you do together. I mean, he acknowledged how beautiful it was. And then I even turned to my daughter. I said, now Shlomo's going to do a Devar Torah. I asked him to do Devar Torah, and he did a whole Devar Torah on notes, and to explain it. And it was just so beautiful how Ringo just, he just loved it. And then I remember we were singing Zmiras Kalbach. We were singing some Kalbach songs, and I was seeing Ringo tapping the table. And I'm saying, if only Shlomo Kalbach knew a Beatle.
Was tapping to his songs.
Tapping to his songs, So
wow,
unreal. What's the story? Once Ringo played the Schottenstein Center,
that was Well, last week I got to meet the new owner of the one who took over Art Scroll, and I reminded him a story that when the Schottenstein Center in Ohio, they wanted to open they opened an arena there at Ohio State. And I got a call from the booker, and he says, Mr. Schottenstein wants a Beatle to open up, to be the first act in the arena. And I said, you tell Mr. Schottenstein that if he wants Ringo, I want a free set of Schottensteins, I meant it truthfully, I meant it. And then as a joke, I said it, So the guy calls me back the next day. He says, Mr. Schottenstein said he'll give a whole set to Ringo Starr, and he'll give a whole set to you on one condition, that he takes a picture holding the Gemaras when he comes to Ohio State. So I said, okay. And so I turned to Ringo, and like a week before, and I said, that gig we're doing in Ohio State, Madonna does Kabbalah. I said, that's Kabbalah, so this is a thing,
it's a thing.
How do I explain to him the set of Gemaras, what it is? And I said, would you mind taking a picture? And he said, sure, I don't mind. And I'll take the picture. I can tell you what it was. We walk into Ohio State, and there's the entire Schottenstein family, and there's a picture in the Jewish Week, which I shared with you, and it's Ringo and I holding the Talmud. And I'll never forget, Ringo said, I never seen David so happy getting a free set of Schottensteins. And then I told him what it was, and I said, they spent billions of dollars. He said, that's cheap. He said, to explain that. He was so brilliant, Ringo. He said, to explain and how they've taken over, how they've changed Judaism more than anybody. How many people are studying Gemara, Rabbi, with you, both of you, and through through what Art School has done. And so it is amazing how Joe Walsh. Okay, Rabbi Jody, you'll appreciate this. I represent Joe Walsh as a client, and I meet him after the Ringo tour, and one day he says to me, you might know my friend in Memphis, Gary Bells, and he said that his father does something I said in YU, some organization called YU. I said, yeah, my father's on the cantorial, goes to the cantorial, teaches at the cantorial YU school for Bells, the Bells School of Music. And I said, wow, there's Gary Bells, Roger Daltrey, Joe Walsh.
Joe Walsh.
It was so crazy. They all find something that ties them all in. So
wow.
And so you represented sports, and obviously your career, your legacy is rock and roll. Comedy. Talk to us about comedy, the new comedy camp. When did comedy come in? The comedians. I know in the documentary I saw you sitting at a table with Jackie Mason, and I forgot who the other person was on your other side. So how did you connect with comedy? What does comedy mean? So
I started in the Catskills. I don't play an instrument, so I'm doing Adam Carolla's show promoting my film, and Adam says to me afterwards, he says, why don't we do a comedy fantasy camp? And it was right before Carolla, and I said, wow, that would be interesting. That I would love to do. After I saw these comedians, I'm not getting up there and doing stand up, but that's hard. So he called me up after Corona, and he says, I said, I said, Rabbi, Adam, I said, it's got to be a fantasy name. I'm in the fantasy business. So he calls me up and he says, Jay Leno and I are good friends. I said, ask Jay. And he went to Jay and Jay said, he'll do it. And so we're doing the week after Sukkot, we're doing our first comedy fantasy camp with Adam Carolla and Jay Leno. And we're going to spend 4 days and teach people to be stand-up comics. I got a lot of writers coming in to teach about that and to teach about writing and I'm excited about it. Sold out. It's sold out right away. And I tell you, you talk about the Jewish connection. I'm in the bakery at Mensch's Bakery here in my neighborhood in California, and all of a sudden I see Carolyn Ray, and she's waiting in line to buy challahs. And I turned to her and I said, Carolyn, are you Carolyn Ray? And he says, yes. The comedian. She said, yes. I said, would you do my comedy fantasy camp? And she said, oh, I'd love to do it. I'd love to do it. And I'm in the bakery. Buying challahs. And I bump into. I mean, the stories are they're funny stories, and I know I could go on and share stories of general managers how they would call me on Shabbos and I wouldn't pick up the phone and all of a sudden they'd call me up after Shabbos and I was negotiating a contract for a player and he wanted I wanted a $2 million and he only wanted to give me $1 million. I was a free agent and I had up to Friday. I had up to make the deal up to Saturday night and the phone's ringing all day Shabbos and I know that I told the general manager I can't make a deal with you anymore. And I knew I could call him Saturday night and make the deal. Phone ringing 1 hour, 2 hours. My kids are freaking out back then. And maybe something happened. I said, no, relax. I come home from shul and it's Buzzy Bavasi of the Angels screaming, okay, you got the $2 million. Don't ever call me again.
That's right.
Plenty hard to get.
Work.
Did you ever think that you'd see this week Ishai Rebo sold out the Garden?
Wow.
Madison Square Garden. A Jewish religious guy, tzitzis, speaking about from the heart, songs about Hashem, selling out the Garden. Like Jewish music is on the rise too. Did you ever think about going into Jewish music? How would you compare Jewish music and rock and roll secular music, performances and the industries?
All right. Well, I'm so glad you brought that up because I'm the biggest Mordechai Ben David groupie, Avram Fried groupie, Isha Rebo groupie. I love Jewish music. And Jewish music is what kept me from. There's no question. A big part of my life is Jewish music. Yesterday, I could create camps, ideas. I put on Shweki. I put on Mordechai. So it gives me soul. I love Jewish music, and I'm so excited that Isha Rebo that he sold out the Garden. I see Avram Fried in Israel selling out arenas and Mordechai. So Jewish music is what kept me from. Was a big part of it because I'm on the road and I'd go back to my room. I put on my Jewish music and it just reminded me you're a Jew. You're a Yid first. And, everybody else went to the bar. I put in my music and Jewish music is my soul. It really is. It's amazing. And, my funniest story is I'm traveling with Colin Hay, who was in one of my Ringo bands, and Colin Hay is from a band called Men at Work. And he, I turned to Colin. I said, "Do me a favor. You got to answer this question, Colin. How do you make a living? How do you make a living? You're touring with Ringo, but the Men at Work they don't work." And he says, David, I sue. Everyone uses my song. I go to the land down under. All right, that's a famous song. He said people use it, and we end up suing. I've made millions of dollars. People use that.
It's a Jewish song.
Yeah, it's not a Jewish. So it's
no. I'm saying there's a cover. Shabara is a cover.
I turned to him and I said, you got to do me a favor. You cannot sue these guys. I said, please. They have no money. They're the Pimentas brothers. They have no money. Yeah. It's the biggest song. And I said, promise you won't sue. He said, okay, David, I promise you I won't sue. I put it on his ears. He starts laughing.
Oh, that's great.
Laughing. And he starts Arshabar. But, so many of those songs, but Jewish music is really my soul. And I cannot tell you that it's all these singers have really, it's so funny. Yesterday, I'm texting my son who's in Shalavim in Israel, and I'm texting him about Shabbos plans. And all of a sudden I get back, it's not your son, it's Mordechai Shapiro. I mean, I've been sending him my son's WhatsApp for the last 3 days. I didn't know. I didn't know, you know. But to see the way these guys and the way they're how big they're getting in the community, and even Mordechai Shapiro, just it's really great. And I think people should. The productions are better, the shows are better. You know, I went to Shreki shows in Israel and Avram Fried. The sound is better, the lights are better. They're being influenced, and you know, I used to hate going to a Jewish concert because it would freak me out that they wouldn't put money into the production. But now they've really upped their game, and it's really beautiful. And I think that Jewish music is really, it really deserves, and they are, you know, listen, every wedding today is hiring these musicians, and they're making a beautiful living. And yeah, I'm Jewish music. That's it for me. Poor Shlomo, you know, he'd be making millions today.
Listen, we can't thank you enough for your time going behind the Bima. These stories, one better than the other. I know we could go for hours. Tell us what's behind you. Who gave you these guitars? I think boxing gloves and a basketball. Tell us what's behind you right now.
Well, you know, I'm a big Larry Bird, big Celtic fan. So someone gave me your casino down there. Gentleman runs a casino, and it gave me a gift. He sent me a Larry Bird signed by Havlicek, and not by Larry Bird and Magic Johnson. Bill Belichick is a dear friend, and then behind me is Don Felder, and I have
Don Felder, Eagles.
I have thousands of guitars. You know, I always get them signed. The problem is they're all to David, so I got to open up a website one day to David, and I can say, you know. But no, I love these are great players. You know, Joe Perry is a guy who did if you Google him, he did a video about Israel, and there are a lot of great ones who love the Rolling Stones, Paul McCartney, but there are a lot of this. We still have a long way to go in getting musicians to go to Israel, and they don't realize there's more money in Israel than there are in most European countries
to do gigs there. Well, Mr. Fishof, thank you for all that you're doing on the front lines for the Jewish people. David, thank you for all that you do. Front lines of the Jewish people. And we appreciate your time. This was really, really amazing. Thank you. And just wishing you the sweetest year of happiness, joy. You got a lot of nachas from your beautiful family that we have the privilege to know, and continue to make a difference for us.
You know, I think if the goyim knew what the word nachas is, they would get more of it. They would seek that out. Yeah, that's really what keeps me going, is the nachas.
Beautiful.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a lot of fun.
Thank you. Rabbi Josh Brody, finally, you got to spend some time. One of your heroes, David Fishof.
Yes.
What's your takeaway? What'd you think of that conversation?
I loved it. It was so honest. And, you know, I didn't realize how connected he was back to Jewish life. I've only read about him, but you see his honesty, and you see his openness, and everything he's trying to accomplish is really at its heart, at the core. It's Jewish. So I love it. I love it.
I love, you know, he's real. He's heartzig. He's a great person. And I love that, you know, he doesn't seem to be swept up. A lot of people, it would be a major social currency. I know this one. I met that one. I had this one at a Shabbos meal. I took a picture with this one. He's like, yeah, it's cool, you know, and it's my job. But like, I'd much rather like my chavrusa, Jewish music, what Jewish music does. I loved what he talked about Jewish music, what that means to him, the Jewish music personalities, the Jewish music superstars. Schottenstein, the Gemara getting a set of shots. You know, the stories are amazing. We could have heard stories all day long from him. Yeah. But I love that he's not apologetic about the industry he's in, the people that he's with. I love that he's representing the Jewish people and a Jewish way of life to them. But in the end of the day, and you look at the results, look at his family, look at what he raised. And, you know, he gets it about the role of, we don't have to look elsewhere. It's not about fame and fortune and viral and how many cool people and arenas you fill. You know, what the values that really matter. He seems on board with that. And it really came across to me in this conversation.
It's amazing. I loved it. He's a true mensch. He's just a great yid.
He is. And so are you, Rabbi Brody. So
I appreciate
thank you for being back, joining again. It's always great to talk and spend time with you. And we got a lot to do. We got to go. It's Erev Rosh Hashanah. Everyone's got a lot of work to do. So we'll leave it right there. Until next time, stay happy, stay healthy.